Thank you. Good morning. So we heard Buena Park is good park. I'm from a place called La Jolla. That means the jewel. It's an expensive jewel, though. So what I'm going to talk to you today about is vaccines, probably vaccines that you haven't ever heard about. Because it's a very diverse audience and group of people, I thought I'd start out at the beginning. So most people would credit Edward Jenner as creating the first vaccine. In fact, how this took place was a milkmaid was infected by a cow, and she actually lived. So cowpox and smallpox can cross over. So what he did was he took material from a pustule and injected it into a young boy who was sick, and he lived. But actually, this wasn't the first vaccine ever developed. The Chinese developed this vaccine back in the year 1000, where they took the pustule, dried it out, and ground it up, and actually shot it up into the people's noses, kind of like vaccines are used today. The first clinical vaccine was really credited to Pasteur. It actually came about from a serendipity type point of view. So what he was doing, he was experimenting with live bacteria, and the one bacteria he was using was cholera at the time, infecting rabbits. He gave this to a technician who went on vacation. Of course, this is in France, and they came back a month later. The bacteria was highly attenuated, and basically, when it was vaccinated, it showed much greater effects. Okay, moving forward a little quicker, because we're in New York, I want to talk about diphtheria protection. So the so-called Schick test, Bella Schick developed this back in the early 1900s, where basically you pricked the skin with diphtheria, and it either turned red or not, depending on whether you had an antibody or not to that material. And Park used this to actually vaccinate most of the children in the school system here in New York. The 40s, where we saw it coming about, were vaccines trying to move forward for polio. In fact, Eddie Cantor, which I'm showing you here, led this grassroots movement where he asked people to send their dimes to President Roosevelt. And if actually 26 million dimes were sent to him, that started the March of Dimes. So I want to fast forward. So there's a story. So I'm a scientist, professor. Where do you get your start? And I guess my start in this area of vaccines and antibodies came from this movie called The Fantastic Voyage. Now, if you're not over 50, you're not going to know what The Fantastic Voyage is. But it was the first, I guess, nano movie that came about. But back then they called it miniaturization or deminiaturization. It starred Raquel Welch and Stephen Boyd. Being a young boy, one had to go see Raquel Welch. I always thought Raquel Welch was from Europe. She's actually went to La Jolla High, where my kids went to school. She had a fantastic accent, though. So the premise of this movie is the following. There was a scientist in Russia who developed this technology that could shrink anything down to the size of a little pinhead. And he was defecting over, and a CIA agent was bringing him over. And the Russians weren't too happy about this, so they tried to have him killed. And so in the process, he hit his head, he developed a blood clot. So they needed to keep him alive because he developed this fantastic technology, right? But they didn't have the means to do the surgery to remove the clot, but they had the means to reduce these people to the size of a pin. So what they're going to do is put him in a little submarine with a laser, and they're going to go floating around in his brain, and they're going to try to remove that clot. And so this is where this part of the movie comes in, my first experience with antibodies. Can we play it now?
There she is. She's damaging those fibers. Antibodies are attacking them all.
Open it! Open it before they get here!
So there's a couple things we can learn from this. Raquel Welch said it's amazing what one young girl in a tight white leotard can do for a movie. That's one thing. The other thing is, why was only Raquel Welch attacked by antibodies? Why not Stephen Boyd? That's because women are more immunogenic than men. Okay. More bumps. It's a tough crowd this morning. Okay. Let's move forward. All right, so I'm going to tell you about some unlikely targets for vaccines. 3 different areas. So we'll talk about Botox first. So please raise your hands if you've heard of Botox. Everybody's heard of Botox, okay. It's the miracle drug for wrinkles, right? Best therapeutic around for wrinkles. It's also, if you probably don't know, it's a fantastic thing that's moving forward for such things as neuropathic pain, hypersweating, migraines. Please don't come up to me afterwards and say, why did you do that to that poor dog? This is Photoshop. People actually say that. Okay. So as I said, it's a fantastic drug for a number of things that are moving forward. So things like strabismus, a single injection, can do this. But what people don't know about Botox is this yin and the yang. So where does it come from? It comes from a thing called Clostridium botulinum. It's a rod-forming gram-positive bacteria. Its lethal dose is shown up there. It's a bioterrorist agent. It's considered by the CDC as one of the top 6 terrorist agents. So you've heard of things as anthrax, Ebola virus, plague, Francisella tularemia. Botulinum neurotoxin falls up there. It's been hypothesized that if 1 gram was aerosolized, it would kill 1 million people. That's how toxic it is. 1 gram, you know what a pound is. A gram wouldn't even fit in my little thumb. Okay, so how does it work? Some of these pictures might be a little alarming. I'm going to show you actually of children. It works cranially and works its way down. As you see, it's a floppy baby. And then on a ventilator. So for most bacterial infections, you can treat it with an antibiotic. You can't do this with this. Depending on the serotype of botulinum neurotoxin, there's 7 types. It can last for a period of months. That's why it's such a great therapeutic. Up to 7 months. If there was ever an attack with this, we wouldn't have enough ventilators to take care of the public. So the point being is a vaccine could be very useful here. So as Julianne told you, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about addiction. So showing you these Picasso pictures about the many faces of addiction. Before I get into this, I want to make a point that no matter what I tell you about, unless we start considering addiction not as a moral failure of the individual, but a brain disease, we're never going to move forward. The other thing that's important to recognize, and I think a number of people, maybe Einstein said this, is that if you keep doing the same experiment over and over, and you expect a different result, it's probably not going to happen. And so we have to start looking at these things in a different way. So we're trying to develop a number of vaccines. One is on cocaine. Cocaine has been around since the times of the pharaohs. They found this is actually in tombs. 1800s, cocaine was found in a thing called coca wine. They used to put about 10 mg per ounce of this stuff. The 70s, I kind of call it the dance fever era with Diphtheria, when they were going to actually legalize cocaine, Jimmy Carter era. And then 1984, a thing called crack hit the streets of New York from Jamaica. So people think crack cocaine is different than cocaine, so it's not. All you do is take cocaine, you heat it up in water, you throw in sodium bicarb, so baking soda, let it crystallize out, and you can see the person smoking it. It's actually a very inefficient way to take cocaine if you're going to do it. But you can see from these lines up there, how the black line and the red line, if you inject it or smoke it, it rises very precipitously in the brain, it drops off very quickly versus ingesting it or snorting it. And this is probably why people go on runs, so-called day runs with these things. What about heroin? I just got an email today from a parent on her child on heroin addiction. Well, of course, there are therapies for this, methadone, but there's problems with this. You can still remain addicted. Places like Africa, Russia, China, these things aren't allowed. We see a huge increase in heroin addiction there. Specifically, heroin's been linked with HIV, non-clear needle use. So I think a heroin vaccine could make a huge impact, especially in these third world countries. Methamphetamine, this is the new child on the block. It's probably one of the most insidious drugs around these days. There's absolutely no therapeutic treatment for methamphetamine. It started in the West and has been moving east ever since. Very easy to make. I'm sure you've all seen Breaking Bad, so you've all seen what a meth lab looks like. Can you identify it? Okay, nicotine. Most people don't think it's a drug. About 20% of all Americans are current smokers. It's the #1 preventable disease. As Mark Twain once said, it's the easiest type of addiction that I've ever been able to quit. I know I've done it 1,000 times. Okay, so how do these vaccines work? How do we develop them? So very simplistically put, we're trying to create molecules that look like that drug. We then attach them to other molecules which challenge the immune system to recognize that drug as foreign, okay? So we're taking advantage of our own immune system to redirect this. And when the person takes the drug, the immune system's alerted, antibodies are formed. They basically remove the drug from the system so it doesn't ever reach the pleasure centers in the brain. The other thing that these antibodies can do, and depending on the drug, is it can create a vacuum to actually withdraw it from the brain. So it's a very simplistic idea, but a very powerful idea, taking advantage of our own immune system. So one might ask, do we need to spend more money on something like this? So 22 million Americans are classified as substance-dependent users. And this comes at a cost of $600 billion in health care. I think this can make a great dent on the overall crisis that we're seeing with the economy today. So I would say yes, a vaccine would be useful. So finally, I kind of want to talk to you a little bit even further outside, something we're trying to develop for weight loss. So ghrelin is a hormone that's made in the gut, and it traverses up to the brain. It's made typically in cycles when you're hungry. So ghrelin's formed when you're hungry during meals. It goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. So you can see a couple pictures here, rats that were injected with ghrelin in the brain, how they increased in their size from eating. You can also see this quote from the New York Times. People were given ghrelin, how they became very hungry and had a lot of food at a particular meal. So we think that if we can control some of these hormones that are involved in metabolic fates or overall metabolism, that we might be able to have an impact on weight gain. So finally, I'm in New York, and I decided I need a New York quote. I don't think it really has anything to do with my lecture today, but I just love Yogi Berra quotes. I got a couple minutes left, and I think I'm going to stop here because my mom, when she was little, she used to always tell me, Kim, less is more. So I'll finish there.